So where are we at, Rob?
We're on Pei Dalet Amud Aleph 84a. Tanya Rabbi Omer. That is 5 lines down. Second word on the line. I'm sorry, 5 of the widest lines down. Tanya Rabbi Omer. Ayin tachas ayin mamish. Rabbi says an eye for an eye means literally an eye for an eye. So the Gemara says mamish. Really, you gouge out the guy's eyes for taking out somebody else's eyes. So the Gemara says Rabbi less like Yechol Hanin Tanoi. Does he disagree with everybody else that we said until now? Everyone disagrees with this. Everyone says it's financial. So Amar Rabba says, no. Rabbi Lozer means to say, you don't evaluate the individual as a slave. Well, what does that mean? You evaluate him like a free person. So Gemara says, Ben Chayran Miasledami. Is there a way to evaluate the loss to a free man? Obviously, you can't sell him. Rashi explains what Rabbi Lozer really meant to say was very interesting opinion of Rabbi Lozer, which is that we do not evaluate the damage of an eye of the nizik, of the one of the victim. We evaluate the damage of the eye to the aggressor.
Excuse me, where are we?
We are now on 84a, widest lines, 7 lines down.
7th first word.
At the we're at the 2 dots. So the first one line is she'en shama. 2 dots are hu chamra.
Wait. Okay, just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. I'm at the wide lines. I don't see the 2 dots. What's the first word in the line?
She'en shaman. She'en. The widest lines of Pei Dalet Amud Aleph, but 7 lines down. 84a.
Thanks. Just a minute, Rabbi. I have to demonstrate again why I have place of show in the Bonehead Talmud class.
Widest lines.
Thank you.
Okay, she'en shaman Isaac ben Izik elo mazek. So according to Rabbi Lozer, we take the eye, when we say an eye for an eye, but when he says literally, he means to say the eye of the value is the eye of the aggressor, which is a very interesting opinion, very unique. Okay, another interesting story. There was a donkey. By the way, the story, you'll have to, like most Talmudical stories, you have to wait until the end of the story. The initial parts of the story are run contrary to a lot of the things we learned. Gemara later corrects it. So you have a donkey, it bit a kid's hand off. Also the Kameder of Papa. So they went in front of her Papa, Bar Shmuel, the son of Shmuel, Amar Lahu. So he said to them, Zilu Shaimule Arbod Varim. He said you have to pay 4 things. Okay, now keep in mind for chayvel is assault. There are 5 payments. An animal pays only 1. That would be nezek. So over here he's saying you pay 4. Doesn't specify which 4. Chayvel pays 5. So if you're paying these multiple payments, you should pay 5 of them. Right? Nezek, tzari, b'sheves, and baishas. He says to him, no, I meant 4 plus 1, so really 5. It's a donkey. Donkey doesn't make 5 payments. He only makes 4 payments. He said, you're right. He said, you're right. You only should have to pay nezek.
I don't understand that. Why a donkey pays 4 for what?
Okay, so there a regular payment it constitutes just nezek. Nezek is the difference in value before and after.
Yeah.
So you evaluate the person or the animal, what's it worth beforehand, what's it worth afterwards. That difference is a payment of nezek. Let's say the guy is the most skilled profession in Talmud, which is a pearl driller. So he drills pearls. So he's right. So let's say what's the value of a pearl driller? I don't know. Let's say it's $500,000, right? Buy him as a slave. Now that he can no longer drill pearls, why? Because let's say he doesn't have a right hand anymore. Right, he lost his hand. So what's his value? I don't know, $50,000. He's a slave without a hand, who can't drill pearls. So he's a regular person, right? So that decrease in value is $450,000. That's nezek. Then we have tsar. We'll talk about tsar in a moment. That's the pain.
Yeah.
Repo is the doctor bills. Then he has to get a prosthetic and the whole thing.
Yeah.
Sheves is the fact that while he's getting the prosthetic, he's holed up in the hospital for a couple of days. Sheves is paid at minimum wage. And that's because you've already paid for the value of his pearl drilling in Nezek.
Yeah.
Right?
That's 450.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Sheves is just the fact that while he's in the hospital, he can't even take a minimum wage job.
How about the mental, emotional,
And
psychological?
Boishes is paid for the embarrassment. And okay, how to evaluate that? We'll have to get to that also. Now, not all of these are all limited to what we call chayvel. Chayvel is damaging a person, assault. It is not relevant to regular nezikin. That would be an animal damaging another animal. So Republic was trying to make all 5 payments for a donkey that bit a kid, and Rabbi is saying, no, you only pay 5 payments for chayvel, for
And
assault.
5 payments mean 5 different categories, or
The 5 payments,
times?
5 categories is just described.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So he says, you're right, go evaluate Nezek. So Gemara says, okay, and this is another critical component, which is how do you evaluate Nezek? You evaluate it with the value of a slave on the slave market. So Amalahu, he says to him, so you're right, go evaluate him like a slave. So the father of the kid said, I don't want you to evaluate my kid as a slave because it's embarrassing for me that you should take my kid to the slave market and figure out what he's worth.
With a missing hand.
With a missing hand. So they said, well, it's not your choice. By doing that, the money doesn't go to you, the money goes to your son. Right? In other words, the nezek here, all these 5 payments are all going to your son. So you have no right for your own honor to absolve the aggressor from a payment to your son. It has nothing to do with you. So Amar Lahu, so he says, you know what? He said, I'd rather him not be evaluated in the slave market, and I'll pay him back the value of the nezek when he gets older. There was a ox that chewed up a kid's hand. They went in front of Rava. He says to them, go evaluate him as if he's a slave sold in the market. Okay, this takes us to an interesting discussion. Abaye says, Rava says anything that requires an evaluation is not done in Bavel. This will have to be explained. Okay, yeah, we'll explain in a moment. He says to them, so Rav explained, you're right. The truth of the matter is that we'll have to go through this in detail, and we will right now. But basically, Rav says that things that require complex evaluations, we'll have to see why this is the case. We don't do. And yes, that does mean that the aggressor walks away scot-free. We'll explain the reasoning for it in a minute. So if that's the case, then why are you making an evaluation in the first place? If the owner isn't, if the aggressor is not going to be paying for it. Gemara says the itofas, because if he grabs it, meaning if the victim grabs the money from the aggressor, then he gets to keep it. I'll tell you an interesting story I once heard. There was the same halacha, by the way, is true of knas, of penalty payments. If somebody steals today, we make him give back the item. We do not make him pay kefil. However, the rule is that if the victim takes kefil, he grabs it, then the court is not allowed to ask him to return it. So, there was a story. So one day, a guy he was in the yeshiva. There was a guy who came in with a new camera, and whenever he was showing off his camera, he was very proud of his camera. So a bunch of guys decided to play a trick on him. One guy specifically. And he decided while he's in the bathroom, he's going to hide the camera. So the guy went to the bathroom, sure enough, the camera's gone. He's all upset. Anyway, the guy, the robber, the robber went out of the room for a moment, and the other guys felt bad for him. So the other guys in the room told him, your camera was stolen by this guy. So he thinks he just learned this halacha. So he thinks himself, there's 2 witnesses here that saw a guy stealing. And the rule is that kefil, if you take kefil, then you're allowed to keep it. So he went, the guys told him where the camera was hidden, so he took his camera back. And for good measure, he took a bunch of other things. He took the guy's sweaters and a couple of other stuff. And then the guy came in and he said, by the way, so I took all your stuff as payment for kefil. So of course they weren't too happy, and they went to a rabbinical court, and the rabbinical court was not able to do anything about it because that is the rule. If you take it, if you take kefil, then you're allowed to take it. So Rav was saying if the victim will take money from the aggressor. Now remember, this is not even chayvel. This is an animal that chews the hand of a kid. This is shor ba'odam, an animal with a person. Okay. Rav Tamei, Rav is according to his own reasoning. The Amar Rav says, Niske shor b'shor, if an animal damages another animal, the Niske shor ba'odam, or a man damages an animal. So in other words, the victim was an animal. The aggressor was either man or animal. The halacha is Goyvenais of Bava will collect in Bava. However, if it's Niske Adam ba'Adam, if the scenario is chayvel, meaning assault, man to man, or Veniske Adam b'shar, a man is damaged by a ox. In other words, the victim is a person. The aggressor is either an ox or a person. Ein Goyvenais of Bava we do not collect in Bava. The question is why? Ma'ash Niske Adam ba'Adam and Niske Adam b'shar. Okay. Why is it that if the victim is a person, Deloy, that we don't collect? Elohim be'inan. Elohim here refers to a court. Court is very often uses the word that's sometimes used for God's name as well. You should say the other way is really true. It's usually used as God's name, but it's sometimes used to describe a court. Then the bottom line of 84a. Elohim be'inan, meaning we require a court. Veleka, and there's no court. So let's explain this. We've mentioned this a number of times. The concept of the real smicha. The real smicha is a tradition that began by Moshe Rabbeinu, where a rabbi would ordain another rabbi. We do not have real smicha today. What we call smicha is not real. It's a modern construct that's been around for a couple of 100 years. Real smicha no longer exists. In order to have a real court, it must be comprised of judges who have real smicha. Yes, that means that today we do not have a real quote-unquote court.
We have no one.
We have no one who has smicha today, and we have no quote-unquote real courts. Now, for certain things, we don't need real courts. We'll get to that in a moment.
No one can trace their lineage back.
It's not lineage. It's individual. So it's a group of rabbis needs to give smicha to a rabbi who becomes eligible to give smicha to another rabbi.
Right.
All of this stopped about, I don't know,
None
1,700 years ago.
No unbreakable chains.
There are unbreakable chains of student to teacher, but not unbreakable chains of smicha. Just because you're a student doesn't mean you get smicha.
So now it's just like a syllabus. Or like
So now whenever there's a Ramah, you can look it up exactly what the requirement is, and it's based on a Gemara in I think it's in Bechiros, and if I remember it's in
so if we build the third
I don't
temple,
know the exact.
with Hashem.
Mashiach comes, we'll get back smicha.
Okay.
And then we'll be able to give. And how do you do that? There is a way to restart smicha. If basically every single rabbi becomes part of a convocation in the rule in Israel, which is something never going to happen in the modern world, then yeah, it is possible. But it will take till Mashiach comes for that realistically to happen. Okay. So now basically it's now in Bavel, because there's no smicha in Bavel, in other words, smicha must be given in Israel. And smicha cannot be given in Bavel. Effectively, there cannot be a properly constituted court, a court that has the law called Elohim. So the Gemara says, "Niske shor b'shor v'shor ba'adam." The same thing is true if the victim of the incident is a ox. The verse also says Elohim be'inan. We're now on top of 84b, third word. Veleka, and there isn't. Elamaishna shor b'shor v'shor ba'adam d'shlichusai ka'avdinan. Okay, so there must be the explanation here is that, well, if we don't have any possible court, then how can we ever judge anything? The answer is we consider ourselves the messengers of a properly constituted court. Now, and obviously this is sort of it's not quite a messenger, right? In other words, this is more of a presumption than than an actual messenger. If I tell you to go drive my car, to the mechanic, you're my messenger, right? If I tell you to go pay somebody else on my behalf, you're my messenger as well. However, if you decide that, today's garbage day and you're going to take my garbage to the curb, are you my messenger? Sort of, right? Sort of. I never made you a messenger, but presumably, if you would offer to take my garbage, I would not object to it.
Mhm.
This is a similar concept. Presumably, the courts in Israel would create the courts of Bavel as a messenger. 1 second. And an example of this, obviously, this is the case that the law is that we do rule on loans. How do we rule on loans if we're not a properly constituted court? The answer is that we're the messenger of a properly constituted court, which requires that all these types of court cases be resolved. So therefore, we also are the messenger with regard to the question of whether or not how much the ox victim gets paid by his aggressor. So it's not, it's true, we're not properly constituted, but it doesn't make a difference because we represent a properly constituted court. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, if the victim is a human being, so why don't we have the same logic? It's just like we rule on other monetary matters like loans and admissions. We should also rule on assault. The Gemara explains, Amri Kika Avdina Shluchasayo, Midi Kimlon Begave, Midi Loy Kimlon Begave, Loy Avdina Shluchasayo. Okay, in other words, let's say a loan, right? A loan, we sort of know how much was borrowed, how much needs to be paid. Same thing with an admission. You admit you sold the property or you owe the person money. We know how much you owe. We know how much the total value is. But over here, we need to do an evaluation. And an evaluation can only be done by a properly constituted court. You cannot act as that court's representative. In other words, there's a fundamental distinction between two scenarios. One is where the money in question is fixed. The other one is where it's not fixed. The Gemara says, "Amri shor b'shor b'shor adam nami lekimlon gavei." Well, if that's the case, then evaluating a dead ox is also an evaluation. No different than evaluating an injured human being. So what's the difference?
Page, position, please.
We're at 84b. In the narrow, about halfway down the narrow lines. 1 second. And the first one line is Puk Chazi. El Puk Chazi. Hecha. Mizdavni Turo Bishuka. Adam Bashar not. Okay. So the Gemara says as follows. So Gemara says, well, a dead ox, we have a very easy way to evaluate it. We go to the marketplace and we look at what the value of a dead ox is. So the Gemara says, well, the same thing is true of human beings. Go to the marketplace and see what humans are being sold for in the marketplace. It's the case that if you steal something, let's say you steal money, so we know exactly what it's worth, right? You steal $100. Well, the rule is you have to pay kefil. Similarly, if you steal a sheep or an ox and you slaughter or sell it, you might have to pay $1 v'hei, 4 or 5. Dikitzi, all these are set amounts. If that's the case, navich shlichusaya, why can't we act as their messengers and collect these payments today in Bavel or anywhere for that matter? So the Gemara says, Amri, okay. So the Gemara says clearly the key component here is not the fact that the money is set or whether it's an evaluation or not. That's not the key component. We are authorized with regard to monetary matters to be their messengers. With regard to a knas, a penalty payment, we don't have the authority to represent them. Like I said before, we don't collect kefil today. So the Gemara says, okay, so that explains why we don't collect kefil or why we don't collect alab hey. We don't make a double payment that a thief normally pays. Today is not collected. Same thing with 4 or 5 if he stole an ox or a sheep and slaughtered or sold it.
Tell me again why we don't collect it.
What? Because it's a knas, it's a penalty payment. In other words, it's not a monetary payment is a payment that is roughly equivalent or slightly less than what you damaged. A penalty is either a fixed amount
Mhm.
or it's more than more damage than you actually caused. So
And
for
the reason we don't
example,
collect it now is,
I'm sorry,
and the reason we don't collect it now.
because we don't have smicha.
Okay, all right.
And moreover, we're not authorized by the court that does have smicha to act on their behalf.
I see.
Because we're outside of Eretz Yisrael.
And
And
because we don't have smicha.
Smicha allows someone the ability and insight to analyze how much something is worth per kefil, like if.
No, smicha is a biblical requirement. Asher yashin aleihem. Yeah. Okay, 1 second. Okay, so with regard to penalties, we're not authorized to collect penalties. So we can't collect kefil, we can't collect alibay. Okay, that part makes sense. 1 second. So Gemara says, but you still didn't answer the original question. What was the original question? And why, if the victim is a person, do we not collect payments? We only collect payment if the victim is an animal. Right? If the victim is a person, we don't judge the case. Why not? So Gemara finally resolves. It also has to be commonplace. So it's not just sufficient that it's a monetary matter. It also has to be a common monetary matter. It's very common the victim of an event is an ox, whether the aggressor is an ox or whether the aggressor is a human. What's not common is that the victim is a human being. A man with a man that isn't common. It's not a common type of victimhood. Victim of an incident. So then, we do not perform. We don't act as a messenger on their behalf. So the Gemara asks, "How is embarrassment. Pagam is sort of the damage. The word pagam is most commonly used in context of a sexual incident. That would be either ines, rape, or mefata, seduction. So there's a decrease in value of the fact that she's lost her virginity. And there's embarrassment. It's an embarrassment to fear for the family. The shchiach, and it happens. And sanavich to chusaya. We should act on their behalf as their messengers to collect those payments. Amr hachanami, the Gemara says you're right. We do. To harav papa agver abame azuzi labaishis. The Gemara says, yeah, we do collect for embarrassment. Why? It's a story where Papa, somebody embarrassed. There was a story of embarrassment, and Papa collected 400 coins for the guy. So Gemara says, the whole lesson of Papa. We do not actually rule like Rav Papa, because when a similar story happened, Shalach le Rav Chizla Rav Nachman. Rav Chizla says to Rav Nachman, Shalach le, and Rav Nachman said, so Rav Chizda basically sent a message to Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman sent back to Rav Chizda, Knasa Kamagos Bavel. How are you collecting a penalty in Bavel? So in other words, it's not true. The halacha does not follow Rav Papa. We do not collect embarrassments. So we're back to the original question. Why don't you collect embarrassment outside of Israel? Ki avdina shlichosaya b'milsa the shlicha v'isbech sarankis. Al milsa the shlicha v'lesbech sarankis. Inam milsa lo shlicha v'isbech sarankis. Lo avdina shlichosaya. Okay, what does this mean? It means that in order to collect, there are two requirements. Number one, there's a financial loss, and number two, it's common. Okay, 1 second. Helgach, so I'll explain. Adam ba'adam, assault. Avagav the isbech sarankis, even though there's a financial loss, keeping the lo shlicha lo avdina shlichosaya. Because it's not common, therefore we don't represent the authorized court. Ba'ish's embarrassment, avagav the shlicha, even though embarrassment is common, keeping the lesbech sarankis, because there's no financial loss, lo avdina shlichosaya, we do not represent. We don't have the authority to represent the court in Israel.
So one thing I don't understand, rabbis from Israel could go to Babylon. They have Shemitah. Why couldn't they?
It's a good question. So it seems that the court has to be not only musmachim, people with smicha, but also that it has to be in Israel
Yeah,
itself.
it's Israel.
The court has to be in Israel. Yeah. Okay, so the Gemara continues. V'shor b'shor goyim bebavel. If an ox scores an ox, you collect it in bavel. Right? That's in other words, the Gemara we've just explained. The entire reason was that if one ox is a victim, we do collect damages. But the Gemara asks, we have another statement of Rava that says if an ox damages, we don't collect it. The Azik man, who did it damage? Ilam the Azik Adam, it damaged a person. Mayer is sure the Azik Adam, I feel Adam the Azik Adam. Not only if an ox hurts a person, but even if a person is the victim of an assault, the same thing is true. We don't collect in a bavel. And the Gemara presumes it's far more likely for a man to be victim of assault than to be victim of an animal. So why didn't Rava emphasize that? Elapshita must be the Azik Shor, that an animal damages, that one ox gores another ox. And we learn that we do not collect payment in bavel. Why not? Any guesses? Amri Hosam b'tam. We're talking about a tam. Tam pays half damages, right? So we started off. We had a big machlokes, but the halacha follows the opinion that says that half payment. What type of payment is it? It's a knas. It's a penalty payment. No penalty in bavel, right? Because we explained that tam, a naive animal. That you familiar with the difference between tam and wood?
Yeah.
A hill?
No.
A tam is an animal. Without getting into too much detail, that's really the first half of the masechta.
Yeah.
But a tam is an animal that has not gored 3 times. So naive, what we call a naive animal.
He's not what?
He hasn't gored. Okay. Basically, there are 3 types of behaviors that an animal can be categorized when it does damage. One type is casual damage. Typical example of that is what we call regal, the feet. So it walked over something and trampled it casually. It wasn't intending on trampling. Now the trampling doesn't actually have to be done with the feet. It can be done with any organ of the body, as long as it's casual. It's not where the animal had no intention to damage. Then there's damage where the animal had derived pleasure from the damage. The most common example of that is eating. Teeth, what we call teeth or shane.
Oh, gotcha.
Shane is eating. It eats something that doesn't belong to it. And there's all sorts of limitations. We're not going to go through that now. And the third type is intention to harm. The animal deliberately harmed another animal. That's typically called Karen. Karen means the horns, because often an animal's mad, it gores with its horns. And that we call Karen. Now, the rule with Karen is that because it's unusual inherently, that's the definition of Karen. Karen is unusual behavior. The first 3 times you only make a half payment. And the question of the Gemara is whether that half payment is monetary. In other words, if it's a monetary payment, in truth, you should pay the full payment. Torah exempted you from half. Or it's a penalty payment. In that case, actually, you're entirely innocent because it's totally unpredictable. You should pay 0 because it's totally out of your control.
Yeah.
The Torah says, well, we'll make you pay at least something. So we'll make you pay half. Now, if it's a penalty payment, as you mentioned, as we're discussing here, you do not pay penalty payments in bavel. And therefore, you'd be exempt from the penalty payments. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so Amri Hassam Batam. So when Rava said you're exempt, he was talking about a tam. When Rava said you're liable, he's talking about muad. Hold on, it's another problem there. Rava says, how do you become a muad? Animal.
You gore people.
He gores people 3 times, and in each time, what do? We bring the animal to court, and we potentially warn the owner. Get a handle on him.
At least twice of those is a tam.
Right. Okay, so Rava ain't muad b'bavel. We don't declare animals muadim in bavel. We don't turn the animals into habituated for unusual behavior. So Gemara says Amri de'ayayet. 1 second. Hold on. Amri de'ayayet hasan v'aisu lahacha. What happened was the animal became a muad in Israel. It gored 3 times in Israel. It became a muad in Israel, and then the guy schlepped the animal down to Bavel. And then that type of animal will collect from. The Gemara says, as you might expect, it's probably not such a common occurrence,
Yeah.
right? And to have an animal that's a muad and it's brought down to Bavel, we're not authorized to act on behalf of a dully constituted court if it's an uncommon occurrence. So the Gemara says, the Osar Rabbanu Hasam v'yadu hacha. So the rabbis came down from Israel and made it into a muad here. So the Gemara says, in other words, this court case does not require Elohim. It doesn't require a dully constituted court, but it does require that the judges be smuchen. So the court does not need to be in Israel. The court could be in Bavel, but they must be smuchen. So the Gemara says maybe they came from Israel because they had smicha. Obviously, they got it in Israel, and they came down to Bavel and they made it a muad in Bavel. So that would work. The Gemara says, as you might expect, but still, okay, these rabbis from Israel made the animal into a muad, fine. But in order for the muad to pay, we require Elohim, a dully constituted court. And we don't have Elohim in Bavel because we need smicha, we need the court to take place in Israel. And we're talking about a pretty extreme scenario. So, like we explained previously, a unauthorized court can only claim to be authorized by a dully constituted court if they're acting under common events. This is an uncommon event. So it's still not authorized. So how can they say that a muad is liable?
Even a common event can be ruled without a court, because it sounds to me
You know, common events that have authorization, common events and this financial loss, they're authorized by the dully constituted court. The court in Israel, and we said it's not an actual authorization, it's a presumptive authorization.
no court.
So does that presumptive authorization exist today? I'm not sure. I think so. Okay, so the Gemara says, we're not authorized by the dully constituted court where it's an uncommon event. And the kika amarava b'shein v'regel the mu'adim mitchilosin. Okay, very simple. When it pertains to Karen, remember, Karen is unusual, not predictable damage. Your truth of the matter is you'd always be exempt in Bavel today. However, when Robert says you're liable, he wasn't talking about Karen and the animal becoming a muad. He was talking about Shane and Regel. Regel is casual damage. Shane is pleasurable damage. Those are mu'adim mitchilasan. The first action of the animal, these are perfectly normal behaviors. And therefore, Robert says in these behaviors, you would have to pay. Okay, tsar kovi b'shbur abimasmar. How do you pay for pain? So kavu, you burnt the guy b'shbud, took a spit out of an oven and you burnt him. You basically branding. Abimasamar, you banged nails into him, or the Gemara gives the Mishnah gave another instance where he banged his nails into his fingernails, which is incredibly painful. However, as you might notice, that type of torture is not permanent. And moreover, it does not degrade the value of a person who has them. And this is a critical question now. It's very possible to put a person in immense pain and suffering without causing any permanent damage. Right? If you think of the slave in the marketplace, right, they don't really care about minor imperfections in most cases. So it's the case that there's plenty of ways for the slave to be tortured or even minorly damaged without any difference in nezek, right? Because nezek is a measure of permanent damage. Nezek is you take a slave. Let's say he's a skilled slave, right? Like we said, he's a pearl driller. He's worth $500,000. And now he can't drill pearls because he cut off his fingers, right? So now his value drops like a lead ball. Same thing if he's a double amputee, right? Maybe even if it's a single amputee. If he loses a finger, he's also worth a lot less. Okay. But if he has burn marks that are going to heal in 5 weeks, what's the decrease in value? I don't know, some token amount of money, if anything at all. Right? If the guy was tortured, they branded him or something like that, and he's not attractive in the first place, then it probably doesn't make that much of a difference in value. It probably makes no difference at all. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah indicates to us these examples of pain, like he was burnt, he was branded, which is almost no decrease in value. That means that you will not be paying nezek. because there is no nezek, right? There is no permanent damage, but you will be paying for pain. Which opinion is the opinion that says that you can pay for pain even if there's no permanent damage? Okay, so now just to jump the gun a little bit, so you can explain this. Basically, there's two opinions. The Torah talks about three types of wounds. Kviya is a burn. Petza is a wound, right? You might think maybe like a scrape mark or something like that. And then there's chabura. Chabura is a permanent damage. And they're listed in that order. So the verse states, if you have a fancy Gemaras, it's on the side of the page of the Torah or Shalom. The verse states, kviya tachas kviya, a burn in place of a burn. Petza tachas petza, a wound in place of a wound. Chabura tachas chabura. Chabura, we'll see if ours has a better word for it. For chabura. Chabura is a permanent damage event. Chabura in place of chabura. Okay. Now, we'll soon see here. The question is how to understand the mission. So let's continue. So Rava says Ben Azai. It's the opinion of Ben Azai. In Tanya we learned. Rebbe says Kviya Nemer Tchila. Rebbe says that burn is the first item listed, and Ben Azai says Chabura Nemer Tchila. Chabura is the first item listed. Now Chabura is clearly not the first item listed. Chabura is the last item listed. The verse says Kviya Petza Chabura. Chabura is the last one listed. What does this mean? Micah Mifki, what's the debate here? So now I just want to, here's the spoiler alert. Everything we're about to say is going to be reversed in 2 minutes. So just keep that in mind. If you're getting confused, it's because it is confusing. It will go the opposite. Okay. Rebbe says, Kviya delesve chabur mashma. A burn implies necessarily that there is no wound. There is no permanent damage to a burn. It's a temporary problem. Kasav rachmana chabura, when the verse states a damage, liglui ala de kviya isbe chabura in iloy. When the verse states chabura, a damage, that means that the type of burn you're liable for is a burn that has damage. Iloy, but if the burn does not have damage, there is no payment for the pain of that burn. Ben Azai says, Kviya de isba chabura mashma. A burn implies that there is damage. Kotzav rachmana chabura, when the Torah repeats itself and says damage, legluya la de kviya de lesba chabura. That tells you that kviya actually refers to a burn even if there is no damage. You're still liable for the payment of pain. Rapapa argues to Rava, and he says, Adrabah, to the contrary, Ibcha Mestavra, the opposite makes sense. Okay, in other words, until now, what we were saying Kviya Nemer Tchila or Chabur Nemer Tchila. What is the word Tchila here? How do we understand the Gemara? We emphasize which came first. Rebbe says what came first? Kviya came first, a burn. Meaning, a burn that has no damage. And Chabur tells me no, that burn is required to have damage. The bruise, right? The bruise tells me that the bird must have damage. And Ben Azai says no. The kviya we're talking about is a damaging burn, the type of burn that decreases the value of a slave. And therefore, Chabur tells me that no. Even a burn that doesn't cause damage, you still have to pay for the pain. So they're emphasizing the verses themselves. Rapapa looks at the outcome, and he defines when they emphasized kviya, a burn, or chabura, a wound, they were actually talking about the outcome. In other words, according to Rebbe, it's the opposite this way. According to Rebbe, kviya means a burn without a wound. And according to Ben Azai, again, outcome associated. So when Ben Azai emphasizes chabura, a wound, he means damage. And that you're only liable for a burn where there is damage. Okay, kviya nemer tchila savar kviya de isba chabura mashma. Kaser chwana chabura legluya la de kviya de lesba chabura. According to Rebbe, a burn is even if there's no damage. Ben Azai says chabura nemer tchila. A wound is mentioned first. Savar he holds kivan savar kviya de lesba chabura mashma. Ben Azai says that kviya is implied without a wound. Kaser chwana chabura legluya la de kviya de isba chabura. That a burn must have a wound. 1 second. In Eloi Loiba, Amaskana Kaimi, it's outcome associated, meaning When Benazzi says chabura, he means actual damage. Otherwise, there's no payment. When Rebbe says kviya burn, he means outcome associated, just a burn. There's no damage to it. Okay, inami, another possibility is the kula alma kviya bein the isba chabura bein the lesba chabura mashma. It could be that both opinions say that a burn reflects a type of burn, whether there is or isn't damage. This is a lovely topic to have at 6:58, right? Klal prat again. Not going to go into it at too much detail, but basically, in short, over here, the chabura is the specific around the kviya, the burn. The burn is the collective statement. Chabura is the more specific one, but the problem is they're separated by something else, by petza, a wound. Rebbe Savar ein donanaisa b'chlal prat. Rebbe says we do not include it in category of klal prat. In other words, Rebbe says outcome associated kviya is any type of burn, even without associated damage. Benazzi Savar donanaisa b'chlal prat. Benazzi says we do rule it in the category of klal prat, and therefore the rule is ein b'chlal masher prat. In other words, it must be a chabura. It must be the burn was permanent damage. According to Rebbe, because Rebbe does not use chabura to define kviya, what does he use chabura? The Gemara says l'dam yiserim. In other words, that you pay if you pay for both types of burns, whether the burn is permanent or whether the burn is temporary, or if there's a mix of the two, you'll pay for both of the types of burns. Okay.
Yashkoach.